My sister-in-law dropped her coffee cup when she saw me walk through the hospital doors. That's the first thing I remember clearly. The ceramic shattered against the linoleum floor, and nobody moved to clean it up because everyone in that waiting room was staring at the same thing, me. In my white coat, with my hospital ID clipped to my chest and the word resident printed under my name in small black letters. My mother-in-law was the one who finally made a sound. Something between a gasp and a word that never finished forming. My father-in-law stood up slowly from his chair, the way older men do when their knees hurt, but their pride won't let them stay seated. And my husband just looked at me with his eyes full of something I hadn't seen from his family in almost 9 years. The man on the operating table upstairs was my brother-in-law. The same brother-in-law who had told everyone I dropped out of medical school. But to understand how we all ended up in that hospital in Saskatoon, you have to go back to a smaller place. A town called Yorkton, about 2.5 hours east of the city. The kind of place where the hockey rink gets more attendance than the town council meetings, and everyone knows which family owns which farm out on which highway. I grew up there with my parents and my older sister. My father drove grain truck during harvest and worked at the co-op the rest of the year. My mother did bookkeeping for 3 different small businesses out of the spare bedroom. We weren't wealthy by anyone's measure, but we were steady. We showed up for things, we finished what we started. I was the one who wanted to be a doctor, not in a dreamy, vague way, in a specific, practical way. I had a plan written out in a binder by the time I was 16. Sciences, volunteering at the hospital in town, applying to the U of S, then medical school. My parents supported it completely. My father used to joke that between the two of us we finally had someone who could explain what was wrong with his back. When I got into the University of Saskatchewan for my undergrad, my mother cried at the kitchen table. Good crying, the kind that meant she was proud. I met my husband during second year. He was studying engineering, easygoing in the way that people from well-off families often are. Not arrogant, exactly, just comfortable. He had a broad smile and a way of listening that made you feel like what you were saying mattered. His name was James. His family lived in Saskatoon. His father ran a small construction company, his mother volunteered at their church, and organized the neighborhood block parties every summer with the kind of cheerful authority that made you feel included whether you wanted to be or not. His older brother Owen was a different story. Owen was the kind of person who filled a room and expected credit for it, confident in a way that sometimes edged into something else. He had an opinion about everything, what you should study, where you should live, how you should handle your money. He had strong views on how things worked. He was also the one everyone in the family defaulted to. If Owen said something, it carried weight. It always had. I didn't dislike him at first. I just noticed he didn't ask questions, he stated things. There's a difference. James and I got serious in our 3rd year. I met his family at Thanksgiving. His mother made a turkey with 3 different stuffings and apologized for not having more options. His father poured wine and asked me about my studies with what seemed like genuine interest. Owen sat at the head of the table and explained to everyone why the housing market was about to shift. I remember thinking the family was warm in that slightly overwhelming way that big, close families can be. I thought I could find a place in it. I finished my undergrad and applied to medical school at U of S, one of the most competitive programs in the province. I had a strong GPA, solid volunteer hours at Saskatoon City Hospital, and a reference from a physician I'd worked with for 2 summers. I found out I got in on a Tuesday afternoon in March. I called James first. He drove over and brought flowers from the Sobeys on 8th Street, slightly wilted but sincerely meant. When we told his family at dinner that weekend, his mother hugged me. His father shook my hand. Owen leaned back in his chair and said, "Medical school's brutal. You sure you're up for it?" I said yes. He nodded slowly, like he was reserving judgment. First year of medicine was exactly as hard as everyone said it would be. I was tired in ways I hadn't known were possible before. I studied at the kitchen table until 2 in the morning. I ate cereal for dinner more often than I'd admit. James was patient with me in a way that I still think about with gratitude. He learned not to talk to me during the hour after I got home, that I needed quiet to decompress. He brought me tea without being asked. I wrote to my parents every few weeks. My mother wrote back with long updates. My father called on Sunday evenings and always asked the same question. "You okay?" And it was never just small talk. He actually wanted to know. The trouble started near the end of my first year. James and I had been living together for about 8 months by then. Things were good between us, but strained in the way that happens when one person is under enormous pressure and the other is watching from close range and feeling helpless. We had an argument one night, not about anything serious, the kind of argument that's really about exhaustion, and I went to stay with a friend for 2 nights to give us both space. Owen was at his parents' house that weekend. I don't know exactly what James told him, but I know what Owen told the rest of the family. He told them I had withdrawn from medical school. He said I was struggling, that the pressure had been too much, that I had quietly dropped out and hadn't told anyone yet. He framed it as concern. He said he was worried about me and thought the family should know. I found out 3 weeks later when my mother-in-law called James to ask if I was doing okay. When James told me what she'd said, I felt my stomach drop. I called her back directly. I told her I was still enrolled, still attending lectures, still very much a medical student. There was a pause on the line. Then she said, "Owen seemed quite certain, dear." I said as calmly as I could, "Owen was wrong." Another pause. "He was just worried about you." James went to his brother directly. The conversation I heard secondhand was short. Owen said he must have misunderstood something James said. He didn't apologize. He moved on. And somehow, in the way that things like this happen in close families where the same person has always been the authority, the correction never fully landed. The version that stuck was the first one. I know this because of what happened 2 months later. We went to a family dinner and my mother-in-law introduced me to a family friend as James's girlfriend who had taken some time off from school. I corrected her gently. She looked embarrassed and changed the subject. Later that evening, I overheard Owen telling the same family friend that things had been rocky for me academically. I pulled James aside after dinner. He said he'd handle it. He went and spoke to Owen again. I don't know what was said. Whatever it wasn't enough. By the time I finished first year and started second, I had mostly stopped going to family dinners. James went on his own. We told people I was busy with studying, which was true but not the whole truth. The whole truth was that I couldn't sit at that table and listen to a version of my life that wasn't real. My own parents knew what was happening. My mother was furious in a quiet, contained way that was somehow more frightening than shouting. My father called Owen's behavior exactly what it was and used a word I won't repeat. But they trusted me. They kept asking the same question every Sunday, "You okay?" And they listened when I said yes. James and I got married the summer between my second and third years of medicine. A small ceremony in Saskatoon. We couldn't afford anything big, and honestly, I didn't have the energy for it. My parents drove in from Yorkton. His family was there. Owen gave a toast that managed to make the entire evening somehow about him. I sent a card to the address after. No response. I'm kidding, there was nowhere to send a card. I just mean that things were exactly as they had always been. Third year was clinical rotations. This is when medicine stops being lectures in a building and becomes actual people in actual hallways and actual emergencies that don't schedule themselves conveniently. I was placed at Royal University Hospital. My supervising physician told me during our first week that she expected me to make mistakes because that was how learning worked, but that she would not tolerate carelessness. She was one of the most demanding people I've ever worked with. She was also one of the best teachers. I flourished, which is not a word I use easily. Something about the clinical environment suited me in a way that the classroom hadn't quite. The structure, the stakes, the specificity of what was needed in any given moment. I was tired in a different way. Tired the way you are when you've done hard things well, rather than the grinding exhaustion of not knowing if you were keeping up. James and I fell into a rhythm. He had a good job by then, an engineering firm in Saskatoon. We had a small house near the university. We had Sunday mornings with coffee and the CBC. We built a life that felt genuinely ours. The gap with his family widened without anyone formally acknowledging it. His mother texted James on holidays. His father called occasionally. Owen hosted Christmas that year and we were invited, but I had a shift on the 27th and we didn't go. It was easier than explaining, and I had stopped trying to explain. What I didn't know during all of those years was that the original story had calcified into fact in his family's mind. Not maliciously, not loud, the tight, not loud lengths. Just the way things do when a confident person says something firmly and no one circles back. His mother would ask James occasionally if I was keeping busy. His father once told a family friend that I had changed directions after university, that I was working in healthcare in some capacity. They weren't lying. They genuinely didn't know. They had accepted what Owen told them, and never asked the question that would have taken 30 seconds to answer. I finished medical school on a Thursday in May. The convocation was at TCU Place. James was in the front row with my parents. My mother was wearing the blazer she wore for every important occasion, navy blue, bought at Reitman's in 2004 and still going strong. My father was wearing his suit, the one he kept in the bag at the back of the closet. He doesn't cry in public as a general rule. He cried that day. I walked across the stage and received my degree and felt something settle in my chest that had been unsettled for a long time. We had dinner afterward at a restaurant on Broadway Avenue. James ordered champagne. My mother ordered a Coke and didn't apologize for it. My father toasted me with words I won't share here because they belong to us. It was one of the best evenings of my life. I started my residency 2 months later, emergency medicine. The hours were long and the cases were hard, and there was a shift during my first month where I worked 22 hours without sitting down. But I was exactly where I wanted to be. I sent James's mother a card announcing the residency. She texted James to say congratulations and that she was glad things were going well. I don't know what she thought I was doing. I don't think she thought about it much. And that was how it went for the next 2.5 years. Me in residency, James working, his family somewhere on the periphery. Not hostile, not close, present in the way that furniture is present, taking up space without requiring attention. Until the February afternoon when a call came into the hospital. I was in triage when the paramedics' radio transmission came through. 41-year-old male, workplace accident at a construction site, significant blunt force trauma to the chest and arm, vitals unstable. 20 minutes out. I was assigned to the trauma bay. He came in on a backboard, oxygen mask already on, 2 paramedics talking fast over his head. I moved to the head of the bed and started my assessment. It wasn't until I looked at the intake form, name, emergency contact, that I understood who was on the table in front of me. Owen. His emergency contact was his father. The address listed was a house I had been to exactly 3 times. For a moment I went completely still, not frozen. I know the difference between stillness and fear in that context, but still. Taking stock. He didn't recognize me in the moment. He was in significant pain and not fully oriented. I did my job. I called the attending, we stabilized him, ordered imaging, got him to where he needed to be. I flagged the situation to my supervising physician immediately. She looked at me steadily and asked if I could remain professional. I said yes. She believed me. She also stayed close. Owen had a broken rib, a hairline fracture in his left forearm, a pneumothorax that needed a chest tube, and a concussion. He was going to be all right, but he needed surgery for the rib and he needed it that day. And the wait in the waiting room was going to be long and frightening for anyone who cared about him. I didn't see his family arrive. I was occupied. But about an hour after Owen was moved to pre-op, I walked out of the trauma bay and into the hallway to give an update to the ward clerk, and I turned the corner and there they were. His mother, his father, James, who had been called and driven straight from work, and Owen's wife, who I had met twice, standing with her arms crossed and her eyes red. James saw me first. His face did something complicated. His mother looked up a second later. She was mid-sentence to her husband, something I couldn't hear, and the sentence just stopped. His father stood up slowly. The hallway was not quiet. Hospitals never are, but between the 4 of them and me, it felt like a different atmosphere entirely. I was wearing my white coat, my hospital ID, my name, and under it, resident, emergency medicine. I said, he's stable. He's in pre-op. I'll get the attending to come speak with you in a few minutes. His mother's eyes hadn't moved from my coat. You're, she started, stopped, tried again. You're a doctor? I'm a resident, I said. Yes, his father's jaw tightened, not with anger, I think, with something harder to name. James put his hand on my arm briefly. A small, private thing. I nodded at him. The attending came and explained Owen's situation to the family, and I stepped back and let that happen. I went back to work. There were other patients, other assessments, other things that needed doing. That is one of the things about emergency medicine that is both its hardest feature and its most useful one. You are always needed elsewhere. You don't have the option of stopping. During a short break in the early evening, I sat in the staff lounge with a cup of bad coffee and thought about the fact that I was having a completely ordinary day and that it was also, objectively, the strangest day I had experienced in years. James came and found me. The lounge had a window looking into a courtyard. We sat across from each other at the small table. "They want to talk to you," he said. "I know. You don't have to. I know that too." He looked at me carefully. "Are you all right?" I thought about it honestly. "Yes," I said. "Actually, yes." We sat for another minute. Then he said something quietly that I've thought about since. "My mother said she never really believed you had quit. She said she just didn't know what else to think." I looked at him. "I know," he said. "I know that's not enough." He was right. It wasn't. But it was also probably true. After my shift, I walked out to the waiting room. Owen was out of surgery, resting. His wife had gone in to see him. His parents were still in the same chairs, side by side, holding paper cups of tea from the vending machine down the hall. I sat down across from them. His mother spoke first. She was not a woman given to dramatic displays. She said my name once, and then she said, "How long?" "How long what?" She gestured, not at the hospital exactly, but at everything. The coat, the ID, the work. "I'm in my 3rd year of residency," I said. "I finished medical school 3 years ago." His father closed his eyes briefly. His mother's hands tightened around her cup. "Owen told us." "I know what Owen told you." She nodded once. She had the look of someone doing difficult arithmetic. "I tried to correct it," I said. "A few times in the beginning, and then I stopped, because it seemed like the information wasn't welcome." His father looked up at that. "That's not, we didn't know." "No," I said. "You didn't, but you also didn't ask." That landed quietly, but it landed. His father is a man who built things for a living. He is not unfamiliar with structural failures and where they begin. He sat with that for a moment. Then he said, "You're right, just those 2 words. No additions." His mother wiped her eyes quickly, the way people do when they don't want to be seen doing it. "We missed everything," she said softly. "Your graduation. All of it." "Yes," I said, not to be harsh, just because it was true. We sat there for a while without speaking. The waiting room moved around us, an orderly with a cart, a family with a small child, the ordinary noise of a building where difficult things happen all the time. Finally, she asked, "Is there a way? Can we start again somehow?" I didn't answer right away, not because I didn't know what I wanted to say, but because the question deserved more than a quick answer. "I don't know if starting again is the right way to think about it," I said finally. "I think we just move forward, knowing what we know now." She nodded. "But I'd need things to be different," I said, "with Owen, with how things get communicated in your family." His father said, "We'll speak with him." I believed him, not because people always do what they say they will, but because he said it in the particular tone of a man who has just understood the dimensions of a mistake and is not inclined to repeat it. Owen recovered well. He was in the hospital for 4 days. I saw him once more before his discharge, briefly, in the hallway outside his room. He was sitting up in bed, his arm in a sling, looking depleted in the way that accidents leave people. He looked at me for a long moment. "I heard you were on the team when they brought me in," he said. "I was in triage," I said. "I flagged to my supervisor right away." He nodded slowly. "Then you're really a doctor." "Resident," I said. "Almost done." Another pause. He wasn't a man who found certain kinds of words easy. I could see that. It didn't excuse what he'd done, but I could see it. "I'm sorry," he said, "for what I told them. Years ago, I don't entirely know why I did it. I did know why. Jealousy is not a complicated emotion, even when its consequences are. But I didn't say that." "I believe you're sorry," I said. "I hope things are clearer now." That was all I had for him that day. It was enough. 3 months later, James and I drove to Yorkton for the weekend. My parents had a barbecue in the backyard, my father's default response to any occasion worth celebrating. My mother made potato salad and her spinach dip that she brings out for events she considers significant. James's parents drove out from Saskatoon. This was new. This had never happened before in all the years James and I had been together. My father shook his father-in-law's hand. My mother handed my mother-in-law a glass of lemonade and pointed her toward the lawn chairs. It wasn't graceful exactly, but it was genuine. At some point in the afternoon, my father-in-law came and stood beside me near the garden. My father was on the other side of the yard doing something unnecessary with the barbecue that he does when he wants to look occupied while he listens. My father-in-law looked at the yard for a while. Then he said, "Your father must be very proud." "He is," I said. "He should be," he said. We should have known sooner what you were doing, what you were building. It was a careful sentence. The kind people construct when they want to acknowledge something without fully excavating it. It's not too late to know it now, I said. He nodded and we stood there quietly for a few minutes, which is a thing Canadians are actually quite good at, sharing space without filling it unnecessarily. My father eventually wandered over with a plate of things that had been on the barbecue and offered them around with the slightly aggressive hospitality he deploys when he likes someone and doesn't quite know how to say so. My father-in-law took something from the plate, and my father asked him something about the drive out from Saskatoon, and they started talking, just two men at a backyard barbecue, doing the work that small conversations do. I watched them for a moment, then I went to find James. He was sitting in one of the lawn chairs with a beer, half asleep in the afternoon sun. I sat down next to him and he handed me his bottle without opening his eyes. "How are you doing?" he asked. I thought about the last 9 years, the late nights studying, the argument that started this, the phone call that didn't correct anything. The 1,000 small moments of being erased from the story of my own life. The morning I walked into a trauma bay and found Owen on the table. The conversation in the waiting room. The backyard I was sitting in now. "Good," I said. "I'm actually good." He opened one eye and looked at me. Yeah, he took his beer back, closed his eye again. The afternoon settled around us, warm and unhurried, the way Saskatchewan summers can be when they decide to be generous about it. A while later, my mother called everyone for dessert, and I got up and went inside to help her. Through the kitchen window, I could see my father and my father-in-law still talking by the barbecue. My mother-in-law was sitting with James, telling him something, and he was laughing. My mother handed me a stack of plates and looked out the window too. "Complicated," she said, not as a question. "Yes," I agreed. "Worth it?" I thought about my father-in-law saying I should have known sooner. About my mother-in-law's hands tied around a paper cup in a hospital waiting room. About Owen saying "I'm sorry" in the careful way of a man learning a word he hadn't used often enough. About James handing me his beer without opening his eyes. "Yes," I said. "I think so." She nodded and carried the plates outside, and I followed her into the light. I thought a lot about the moment my mother-in-law looked at my hospital ID and said, "You're a doctor?" Not because it was dramatic, it wasn't really, but because of what that question cost both of us. 9 years. A graduation she wasn't at. A version of me she had never been allowed to see. The strange thing about that day is that I wasn't angry in the trauma bay. I was focused. I did my job the way I had trained to do it, and I flagged the conflict immediately, and I stepped back when stepping back was right. That steadiness didn't come from nowhere. It came from years of showing up when things were hard, from choosing to keep going on the nights when I wasn't sure I could, from deciding early that what other people believed about me wasn't going to determine what I actually became. I don't say that with any pride. I say it because I think it's the only thing that got me through. Owen's lie didn't break me, but I want to be honest, it could have. There were moments, especially in those early years, when the silence from James's family felt like a verdict. When I wondered if it was worth continuing to send cards that were never answered, worth correcting a story that no one seemed to want corrected. The temptation to collapse inward when people don't believe in you is real. I felt it, I just didn't follow it. What I've come to understand is that other people's willingness to ask questions, or their failure to, is a reflection of their own fear, not your worth. My father-in-law is a decent man. He built things for a living, and he valued getting things right. And still, for 9 years, he accepted a story about me because questioning it would have meant admitting he might have been wrong. That's not cruelty. That's just how pride works when it goes unchecked. It doesn't announce itself, it just quietly closes doors. And Owen? I think about him too. A competent man who told one lie because he couldn't stand to be in the shadow of someone else's success, and then spent years unable to take it back because the lie had become load-bearing. Every family has someone like that. Someone whose insecurity learned to speak before their integrity could catch up. What I keep coming back to, though, is James's mother in that waiting room, hands wrapped around a paper cup, saying we missed everything. There was no cruelty in her, just a woman who had taken the wrong person's word for things and never once stopped to verify. One phone call to the university. One direct question to me. That's all it would have taken. I think about that whenever I'm tempted to assume I already know the shape of something. The most honest thing I can say is that I don't always ask enough questions either. I got through those 9 years by going quiet, by building a life without them, rather than fighting to be seen. That was my way of surviving it. But I wonder sometimes whether one more conversation, one more attempt, might have shortened the distance. What I know for certain is this: integrity. Doing the right thing even when no one is watching, even when the people who should be watching have already looked away, is not its own immediate reward. It's a long investment. It paid out for me in a trauma bay in Saskatoon, of all places, on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, not because the universe arranged it that way, but because I had kept going long enough for the truth to eventually take up the same space as the lie. My mother carried plates out into the backyard that evening, and I followed her into the light. That's where things stood. Not resolved, exactly. Not erased, just forward. Which is, I think, the most honest direction available to any of us.